All right, so fuck it. We're talking about chicks. We're talking about porn. We're talking about sex. Frankie wants me to say strap in here with a joke that, sorry, I had to say that, but we'll say that just to indulge her. So anyways, what we're talking about on this episode is we have my friend Caroline Spiegel joining us. Caroline is the founder and CEO of Quinn, and Quinn is an audio porn, audio erotica company. And before we get into talking to Caroline, we're actually just going to create some context around porn in general, how big the porn industry is, why porn is the way it is, and why porn needs to change to work for women. All right, so let's just quantify things here just to give us a baseline of where we're at. So, all right, the porn industry. All right, so the porn industry is described largely as a sit-up industry versus a lean-back medium. Television is a lean-back medium, porn is an active medium. It is extremely difficult. We have been working on this for about a week. It's extremely difficult to put your finger, literally, on how big the porn industry is. The reason for this is most companies that work within the porn industry are private, and so they don't have to disclose they don't have to disclose much information, if any at all. There's a lot that happens illegally. There's a lot of bad and nefarious stuff that happens under porn, including sex trafficking and a lot of other horrific things. But what's interesting when you think about porn is that there are over 1.3 million porn websites worldwide. And the average revenue for porn and the porn industry, not sex toys, not sex enhancements, not supplements, not Roman, not hims and hers, not all that stuff, just from porn specifically, which is a content business, it's an entertainment business, is $100 billion. The US accounts for $10 billion of that 100 billion. So we account for, is that 10%? Yeah, so we account for 10% of the porn industry worldwide. I actually would have thought that would be higher. That's actually a very interesting statement about America. Anyways, so the porn industry is growing on average about 13% year over year. What's interesting is the US economy is growing about 8%. So the porn industry is outpacing the US economy in terms of growth. What's interesting about porn at large is that it's bigger than the NFL, it's bigger than Viacom, it's bigger than Netflix, it's bigger than the entire Hollywood ecosystem, and it's bigger than the NBA. It was interesting when I started my career, I worked at Fidelity, as you guys know, and I remember all the Google sales reps would come to see us. This is probably 1999, and being narcissistic and obviously thinking we were Fidelity Investments, we were like, obviously they are traveling to Boston, Massachusetts to see the good people in the fine institution of Fidelity Investments. And the Google people were like, nope, we're actually going like an hour north. There was like a ton of porn businesses on the North Shore of Massachusetts. And those industries and those businesses were the businesses that drove Google for their first early years of existence, because the porn people, obviously they're looking to drive more eyeballs, they're looking to drive more viewership, they're looking to drive better conversion. The people that work in porn, whatever you may think about them, they are very fucking smart. And so what was fascinating is I remember like Karen Khan, and we had these great sales reps, and they would be like, yeah, we're like going to go see the banking people, and then we're going to go see the porn people either right before or right after. So porn is a mega business. It's a mega advertising business. It's a massive consumption business. It is a high revenue business. What's interesting when you look at porn versus looking at Netflix or looking at the NFL is that time spent on porn websites is on average 10 minutes. So you can just think of that what you will. But when you think about the revenue associated with porn for 10 minutes of activity versus the revenue associated with all those other platforms for hundreds of hours of activity, it's actually quite fascinating. It's kind of interesting, which is people don't like to talk about porn. They don't like to talk about the porn industry. It's kind of seedy. It's unstated. I think people like to relegate it to Las Vegas and places like that. But when you look at the US economy, it's as big as a contender as many of the other blue chip businesses. What's also interesting is that porn affects the economy. So yes, this is in fact real. Cities that don't play by porn rules risk substantially losing tax revenue. And there's a bunch of cases on this, which we'll get into. It's kind of interesting. It's like when there's a winner, there's a loser. Like right now, I think New York is like such a loser state, and Florida is like winning. Florida's won coronavirus like to the nth degree. And it's because all the New Yorkers are frankly now relocating to Florida. Porn is the same thing. So California has been since about 2012 trying to change porn. So in 2012, LA County LA County, out of a lot of concerns and rightful good concerns around HIV, wanted to mandate that porn actors wear condoms while filming. They did that. They legislated that. And as a result, the county subsequently saw a 95% drop in porn permit requests. And Las Vegas, during the exact same time period, saw a 50% increase in porn permits. In 2016, the California lawmakers again proposed a ballot measure regarding making performers wear condoms. What was fascinating in 2016 is that their Secretary of State and a bipartisan group basically said, if you do this, if you try to make this law go through that mandates that porn performers should wear condoms, which seems like something fairly reasonable request, the state would lose millions of local tax dollars every single year. And surprise, surprise, the regulation never came to be. What's interesting is, so my takeaway on that is, look, if you can influence the legislator, you have a very big tax business. So guys right now, men make up about 70% of searches on porn sites. They're not the only ones looking for porn. But it's very obvious that porn is overtly and very obviously geared towards men. One of the things that we started to look into was the idea of the male gaze, which I want to talk about for a second. So what's interesting, I don't know if you guys have heard about the male gaze. I actually didn't know a whole lot about it, but I read a lot about it last week. So in feminist theory, the male gaze is the act of depicting women and the world, and most acutely in movies, in advertising, in visual mediums, as being passive, as being sexual objects. And the notion of the male gaze, what that really refers to is that the woman is only viewed in the perspective of the male. So when a woman is co-starring in a movie, she's really only co-starring to help tell the story of the man. And the reason the male gaze exists, it dates back to the 1970s. There was a very famous article written by a British film critic named Laura Mulvey. What her point of view is that in cinema, the male gaze has really three perspectives. One is the man behind the camera, so the guy shooting the movie. The second is the character within the film. And the third is the person watching the movie. And all three of those characters are male. And as a result, the woman is viewed in how in the reaction that she evokes from those three men. And that her role in whatever visual medium it may be would be to create pleasure, to be objectified, to be sexual, to be passive. And that's why and how women have been objectified and viewed as passive, viewed as sexual objects, viewed as lesser, viewed as a tool or a token, as part of male desire. What I think is interesting about the male gaze is when you look at movies, whether you're looking at movies from the 60s, from the 70s, from the 80s, even when you're looking at like superhero movies from now, women are so often objectified. Women are put on screen, the way the camera looks at them, the way the camera travels up and down their body, what they say, how they speak, how they act, the way the roles they play in sex, the roles that they play in being pursued versus pursuing men. It's all about the construction of film And the idea of the male gaze is that everything is constructed for a white male. There's also something that's emerging called the female gaze, which is the woman's counterpoint, and that film and TV and commercials and advertising created by women will show a radically different point of view, where the woman is active, where she's in control, where she has her own pursuit, where she has her own desire, where she isn't just a character in someone else's narrative, but she is the character and the star in her own story. So what's interesting about this is when you think about porn, which is largely shot by men, largely created by men, largely run by men, it's very obvious that you're going to get a product which is geared towards men, not necessarily geared towards women. And when you look at porn, it's very obvious. Like the majority of women I know, maybe some of the daddy gang disagrees, is like looking at a male appendage is not necessarily a turn on. Porn doesn't necessarily reflect female pleasure at all. The storylines aren't real. The characters aren't authentic. Most often when you look at all of the thumbnails of porn, it is showing a body part, like a completely objectified body part, or it's showing a woman being dominated. Like those are not necessarily themes that resonate with today's woman. Women are empathetic. When you look at the research around what women want around sex, what women want around sex and what their reactions are of porn, they want stories. They want authenticity. When they watch porn, they feel a sense of empathy and relation to the characters that they're looking at. It's not an on-off switch. It's not like I'm turned on or I'm turned off. Women are looking for something that is far more nuanced, far more elusive, far more dynamic, far softer. And so what's interesting, and this we'll get into this with our interview with Caroline, is that there's a huge opportunity for creating pleasure and creating visual pleasure and porn for women. The other thing that I think is so interesting is that when you think about women's purchasing power, like if you look at the CPG category, you look at the automotive category, you look at the financial category, like everyone is looking for women. Everybody's looking for women. The future is female, no doubt about it. And what's interesting right now is when you look at this industry is not female. And what I think is very interesting about Call Her Daddy, and what I think is very interesting about Alex Cooper, and what I think is very interesting about Quinn, is that what I think you're starting to see is a new generation of woman who is going to go find what she wants in her career, in her life, in her family, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, in the boardroom, on the street, in what she wears, how she acts, who she's friends with, what she stands for. And I think what's interesting in this category is I think you're going to see a total revolution. Like if I had a lot of money to invest, I would start to look at companies that are going to transition what is a highly lucrative, highly passionate, high frequency business. And I would think about what are the companies, what are the platforms, and who are the people who are going to make this relevant to the people on the planet who have the highest purchasing power, which are women. One person who I'm a huge fan of is Alex Cooper. I think Alex Cooper is a pioneer and a revolutionary in the sex industry and in the notion of entertainment overall. What I think is revolutionary about Alex, which we get into in our conversation with Caroline, is that she has completely normalized sex. She has made comfortable the idea of talking about who you are, what you want, what's funny, what's ridiculous, and what's bad in the bedroom. She has essentially created a category that is locker room talk for women. Like everyone criticizes Barstool for being like misogynist and a bunch of frat boys, who just have locker room talk all the time. If I were to find anyone at Barstool Sports who has locker room talk, it's Alex Cooper. She's completely normalized hookup culture. She's embraced hookup culture. She has made her own personal experiences relatable. She has made the idea of harnessing your sexuality so prevalent that if you go to a college campus right now, you see it on sweatshirts walking around campus every single day. And she has created a movement. She's essentially created a pack of women who are in control and embracing who they are, not only at school, in their life, with their friends, but also between the sheets. All right, so joining us next is Caroline Spiegel. Caroline Spiegel is 23 years old. I'd mentioned she is an entrepreneur. She launched a company called Quinn in 2019. Quinn is an autoerotica website. The idea stemmed from her own personal experiences and the idea that traditional porn does not work for women. She's on a mission to help break the stigma around women, around masturbation, around sexual pleasure. And she describes Quinn as a much less gross, much more fun porn hub for women. So here's Caroline. All right, ladies. All right, Caroline, welcome to the Token CEO podcast. I am a huge fan of yours. I was talking about you today, and you're just like this smiley, bubbly little thing. And I'm just like so excited for your entrepreneurship. I'm excited about how ballsy you are. I think you're so vulnerable and personal. So what I would love for you to do is explain what is Quinn and why did you create it? Let's just start with that.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. Yeah, I'm Caroline. I'm 23 and I run a company called Quinn, which is basically audio porn for women. Audio porn is a new take on porn that focuses on the female perspective. So no visuals, just kind of dirty talk. I can explain more later. And I created it because in college, I had an eating disorder, obviously a really hard time, but not only did it mess with a lot of things about my body, but it messed with my sexuality, my sex drive, my ability to orgasm. So I really just wanted to create an option that was designed specifically for women, rather than kind of your typical Pornhub, tube site, that kind of thing.
All right. So you go to this big highfalutin school. You find yourself with an eating disorder. You finding that it has implications for you in places where you did not expect it. And then you still want pleasure and you want to be sexually active. Tell me why regular porn didn't work for you.
Yeah, I remember exactly where I was in my little studio dorm situation. And it was probably I was back to normal weight. I was on the road to recovery from my eating disorder, feeling good in my life, but I just couldn't orgasm while masturbating. And I would actually just get exhausted and sweaty and over it when I was dry. Yeah. It was so frustrating. My body was not cooperating with me. And I tried Pornhub, YouPorn, you name it. But the first thing that actually worked for me was audio porn on Tumblr and Reddit. They're kind of these small big communities, but unknown to the mainstream audience. So that's where I really first was able to get into my sexuality again, start orgasming regularly. And I just felt great. So I was like, this should be a thing. Oh, I actually made a blog of the audio porn that I found on Tumblr and Reddit, and I sent it to my sorority, and it went viral in the sorority. So that's kind of when I knew okay, I got to do this.
You were on to something. Okay. So flash forward. So you've had this personal experience. You're 23 years old. You decide to create Quinn, and describe what Quinn is.
Right. So basically, you describe it well when you compare it to Headspace. It's a very similar thing. It's a subscription service you pay for. We have a bunch of different creators that make audio porn. And they range from, kind of boyfriend energy, super romantic, to kind of daddy energy, super dominant and aggressive. But the whole idea is just, you get to be the star of the show. You get to close your eyes, imagine you're in bed with someone super hot, and listen to them dirty talk to you.
I think what's so interesting is that I just applaud you. So I think what's so interesting is the idea of understanding actually what women want. So when you read about, we've talked about on this episode, when you read about what is appealing to women and what women are looking for versus what men are looking for, and then you look at the porn industry, the porn industry is, I think, $100 billion industry, but it's quite graphic. There's a lot of appendages, it's all about tits and the dicks, and it's very graphic, which I don't think those things in isolation are frankly that good looking. It's just gross. But it's also showing dominance. I don't know, there's a violence to it, but there's something that very fake and inauthentic about it. And I think what you're kind of getting to is what all the studies show, which is women are looking for empathy. They're looking for authenticity. They're looking for everything but the sex. And so talk a little bit about like, how do you think about the archetypes? Like, how do you think about the personas you have on the platform? Like when you and I've talked about it, we've talked about it like Peloton, right? Like I did an Ally Love class this morning. I love Ally Love. Ally Love has got her hair. It's going like 1,000 different ways. She's got a little outfit on. I like her motivation. I'm not into like, there's somebody else, all the guys, like she has very big boobs. I'm not into her, but I think the idea of choosing your storyteller is really interesting. I think that's what's happening in content right now, but talk a little bit about how do you find your creators and how do you think about, how do you understand if they appeal to women or not?
Yeah, I think, I find them everywhere. I find them from, Reddit, Patreon, YouTube, Tumblr, Instagram, TikTok. And I think I look for people who have very small but very loyal fan bases already and are kind of making racy content. And I especially look for, men in their 20s, 30s, that kind of vibe. And I find that naturally and authentically people develop personal brands on social media. So I sort of try to take that and like dial it up to 100. So with Harry, for example, he was one of kind of our first breakout star. He's like this British guy, very like boyfriend energy, romantic. And he really was like personally passionate about like female first sex and how to please a woman and learning all the different ways to please a woman and the anatomy and all this stuff. So he started doing Instagram lives about, the 3 different types of orgasms, all this stuff. And he just really like actually felt interested in this stuff. So I just tried to encourage that and his brand came naturally. And then, yeah, there are just tons of other types of people too. So yeah.
So how did you, okay, so talk about going to raise money for Quinn and talk about starting Quinn. So you're like, okay, I'm going to create audio porn. You got to explain to your parents, like, I went to Stanford, you paid like $1 bazillion for me to go to one of the best schools on the planet. And I'm going to get, you probably were like, I'm going to get into the health and wellness industry. But explain, like, how did you decide this was a career and how did you follow that through?
Yeah. Like so many people have asked me like, why isn't this just a side project? I tried it as a side project, but it was too much fucking work. So I had to, stop doing school. And I think, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference between the way I talk about Quinn with my users and then with my investors, my parents, etc. And like you're saying with investors and parents, it's more of that health and wellness angle. I highlight the sides of the industry. And then with my users, I try and just be real with them and say like, do you want to orgasm reliably? With investors, like, I think we talked about this. It's really hard as a 23-year-old girl starting a porn company to be taken seriously. So I just stopped like expecting
it's hard
that.
for a 23-year-old to be taken seriously. I think. Yeah.
And I just tried to, give them a positive experience with me, like give them the experience of working with a 23-year-old woman in the sex space who's competent and reliable and, well-spoken or whatever, in the hopes that I could just change their mind by showing them. And that's been the most effective instead of being like, oh, what was me? No one likes me.
And what do you think investors saw in the vision?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was talking to one of my friends and I mentioned that this particular guy invested in Quinn and he was like, oh, him? He doesn't like, he's such a prude, and like all this stuff. And it's really interesting because sometimes the investors that say they're the most sex positive, the most, freewheeling, they're not actually interested at all in companies like mine. So it's really like a person-to-person basis, relationship-based thing. But I think what the vision is 4 billion women masturbate. Sorry, 2 billion. Fuck. Can you edit that? 2 billion women masturbate. And the vast majority of them use their imaginations. So just like even the idea of taking a 10th of that market is attractive to any investor.
Mm-hmm. And how was the pitching process? Like, were you the only woman in the room usually?
Yes. Most usually I was the only woman in the room, talking about clits and buttholes. But yeah, no, I actually like men, I enjoy hanging out with them, talking to them, pitching them. I would say like, everyone told me before I started pitching, like, practice your fucking pitch. Just practice it in front of a mirror, practice it in front of your friends. And I was like, I don't need to do that. I'm like, so I got this down.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. But then as soon as you walk in the room, you're like, what was I
Yeah.
gonna say?
Yep. So talk about the caller daddy effect. Like one of the things that I think is so revolutionary about Alex, which we've talked about here, is that I think what you're doing is you're trying to solve a need, which is very unspoken. And I think women are by and large afraid to talk about sex. They feel dirty when they talk about it. They feel ashamed. Like one of the things I love about you and that I loved about you from the jump is like you actually had me at this, which was the way you talked about A, your eating disorder, and B, the idea that you deserved pleasure. And you talked about both of those things like very honestly and very unapologetically. And I think that that's something that I actually think is very generational. I think if you were to find women my age or women older than me, like they're not talking about that. But I also love just the strength and the vulnerability, and also like, this is real life. Like this is happening. This is how I feel. Like this is what's going on with me. And I think one of the things that Alex has done and Call Her Daddy has done, which is why I'm so proud that we're a part of it, is that she's completely normalized the conversation around sex, and she has completely given a voice to the woman in the bedroom. And I think that that's actually what's been missing, is the woman's voice is usually very silent. Nobody gives a shit if she's getting off. Like she's an object. She's there to facilitate the man's desire. And Alex has made it like over the top, raunchy, empowered, funny, relatable. And so talk about, especially for your generation, talk about like, what do you think's happening around sex? What do you think the impact of Call Her Daddy is? And how do you think this is going to change things for women in the future?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just such a huge fan of Call Her Daddy, daddy gang all the way. But I think, like you mentioned, it's so relatable and honest and authentic, even though she does crazy voices and crazy jokes, they're all based in truth, in fact. And I think when you just address the world as it is, it's so powerful, and people feel so relieved that they're not alone and the only one that's, not coming all the time. And yeah, I just think that's so powerful to give that a voice, to give that a platform. And I do think, by giving words to certain things, you allow people to talk about them. So no one who's, an 18-year-old girl in college is going to be using scientific terms around her sex life. But all of a sudden, Alex gives her the Gluck Gluck, Alex gives her, Slim Shady, whatever. And she can speak about this with her friends, get information, learn, communicate, etc. So I think that's just so huge. Mm-hmm. And in terms of our generation, I would just say in general, I think my generation is interested in vulnerability, interested in sex positivity. And, it's cool to be honest about what's going on, and it's cool to want things in the bedroom. I was actually talking with my mom about this because she was saying the same thing, how even with her friends, her closest friends, it's not as just open as my group of friends. So I think that's just a positive shift. How can you ever do anything if you can't even talk about it? So yeah.
What percentage of the time do you think you and your girlfriends talk about sex?
Every time we hang out, like we talk about sex.
So like 100%.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we're like dissecting the last time we had sex. It's more just like, what do I make of this? Like he texted me this. Does this mean he wants to bang me? Does this mean he wants to be friends? Like, it's kind of like anthropology. I don't know. It's like a mix of science and anthropology.
It's so interesting because I think that is just so different. Like with my girlfriends, we never talk about sex. It's like a 0% of the time. And I think that that's maybe an age thing, and it may be a generational thing. The other thing that I love that you and I have talked about is I think there's two things, which is like girls fuck. Like that should be an anthem, like they do. And we should like build a whole business and a whole world around that. But then I think the other thing that you said was, I think there's a great quote that's like, everything is about sex except sex.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of what you're harnessing. You're harnessing both of those things, which is the reality that women are sexual beings and the reality that they want something that's not necessarily delivered to them today. And you're building a company and a platform that's going to solve that. And then the second thing that you're, I think, acknowledging, which is absent in porn, is that it's all about the lead up. It's about foreplay. It's about empathy. It's about the storytelling. Your imagination and your brain are engaged. It's not just about like dominance, control, an active task. Like, so tell me what you think. Like, do you think I'm right on that? Like, tell me what you think about that.
Well, it's so interesting that you put it like that, because on the one hand, yeah, like you say, one of my anthems is girls fuck, girls like to fuck. But I think it's important to be like, well, what does that mean? Right? It doesn't mean they just like a huge cock just like in their mouth. You know what I mean? It's like, it means they want this like this holistic experience of intimacy, desire, play, flirtation, all these other things that we don't have good words for yet, but they're like the oomph of sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's wrong to say just blanket, girls like the physical part of sex. It's the everything of sex. And I think that idea that like everything is about sex in a way is so true, because we're always, a lot of our goals are centered around, who we eventually want to have sex with, or why, they'll want to have sex with us or whatever. So, yeah.
Do you think that you guys will be a happier generation because you're more forthright about it?
I think I do. I really do. I always say that one of the hardest, like contradictions of working in sex and whatever is that it's sometimes sexier. It's like why people turn off the lights when they have sex. Some amount of mystery is very exciting. But if you have so much mystery that you have no fucking idea what's going on or what your partner wants or whatever, then it's terrible. So it's
very
really
alienating.
Yeah, it's lonely. And to have like the right amount of mystery where you're always kind of on your toes, that's great. But you don't want so much mystery where you're just like, shooting in the dark and you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, because I think that creates like a very deep vulnerability that, it's kind of back to your eating disorder thing of like, you don't know what you're trying to control or what you're trying to solve for, but you're eating at yourself to try to mitigate that. And I think the same thing is true. It's interesting when you look at the research on traditional porn. One of the things that happens to women that doesn't happen to men is that women internalize what they see. So in the case of a man watching porn, he can take it for what it is. It's like an on button or an off button. It's yes or no. It's completely binary. But for a woman, when she watches porn or looks at porn, she judges herself by what she sees. And I think that's something that's very different about the female gender, which is she's judging her body by virtue of the bodies that she sees. And she either likes herself more because of it or she likes herself less because of it. And I think you're right. Like what I love about Quinn is that I think you're giving women something that is just made for them, where you don't have to internalize a bunch of things, or you don't have to watch a bunch of shit that's not arousing to you. And then what I love about Alex is that Alex is making it completely comfortable, to talk about anything, but also to reject the stereotype, like to reject that you're passive and to reject that you're supposed to look like this or that or the other thing, you're supposed to do something a certain way. And I think that's actually just what's so forward about you guys and who you are.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I was thinking about this, like the amount of anxiety that exists in like a young woman it's just not a happy way to live life, right? You've got to worry, does this guy like having sex with me? Does this guy like my body? Am I doing the right thing here? Blah, 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 blah.
Am I good? Like,
Yeah.
am I good is like
the worst.
I think if you were to take like how much time the female psyche spends thinking about like, am I good enough? Was that good? Was that good for, did he like that? Did he really like that? Like it's
great.
A disturbing amount of time.
There's this great quote by this comedian I love, Jacqueline Novak, and she goes, women spend their whole lives baby proofing the world for men. And I just love that image of like setting up a little like, playpen, like making it perfect. And I think, yeah, like you're saying, Alex, she makes it cool to not be anxious, to be confident, to not give a fuck. And to have that permission to like stop those thoughts is so, so huge.
How do you think, so speaking of loneliness, like, do you feel lonely in your quest to build Quinn? Or how do you feel about your journey?
Yeah, I think for a long time, I thought that everyone's advice was right. Like everyone who had 2 cents, I was like, how did I not think of that? Fuck, I got to do that too now. And I think I realized ultimately that, pretty much all advice is useless. And what's really helpful is just having people who care about you, really want to see you succeed, that you can lean on, like truly. And to kind of just like do the work and like stop listening to the noise, because you'll just end up feeling like so inadequate all the time. And you just have to kind of like, fucking do it.
I agree with that. I think what you're doing is awesome. Like, I'm so rooting for Quinn. So what's next for Quinn? Like, tell us what the next 6 months looks like for Quinn.
Yeah, so I'm really excited that in April, we're launching our mobile app and our new website. So that'll be just so sick. We have a lot of new content that we're releasing then. So I would say follow us on Instagram at Try Quinn to see when that gets launched. And I think mostly, my goal is to make this the default option for all women who masturbate. So you just, get your coffee in the morning, take a shower, put in your headphones, listen to Quinn, feel fucking amazing, continue on your day. So yeah, that's where we're at.
Very efficient for the woman on the go.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Caroline, I love that. I think that I just think it's ballsy. Like, literally, I think what you're doing is so ballsy. And I think that the way you've made yourself part of it is just noble. And, I'm like such a champion. I'm obviously like on your page every time. Awesome. All right, Caroline, thank you so much. I appreciate you doing this 3 times.
No worries. Thank you guys. Happy Sunday.
All right. Happy Sunday. Bye, Caroline.
Bye.